Imagine this: a man in an impeccable suit, speaking 5 languages fluently, sipping champagne at a high society gathering in 1920s Paris. He moves effortlessly among industrialists, aristocrats, and politicians. But unlike them, his wealth isn't inherited or earned. It's stolen, tricked, and swindled. His name? Viktor Lustig. Have you ever noticed how often we admire con artists? From the elaborate heists in Ocean's 11 to the cunning tricks in Now You See Me, pop culture glorifies the art of deception. There's something thrilling about watching someone outsmart the arrogant and the unsuspecting, using nothing but intelligence and charm. But why? By every ethical and legal standard, con artists are criminals. Yet when we read about a charming rogue pulling off a masterful heist, especially against the wealthy elite, we can't help but feel a twinge of admiration. But here's the catch. Watching a con artist from afar is one thing. Being their victim is another. Today, I'm diving into the story of one of history's most legendary fraudsters. Let me introduce you to Viktor Lustig, an Austrian by nationality, a Czech by birth, and a swindler by profession. His biography reads like an adventure novel, though, like most good stories, it's laced with exaggeration and myth. What is certain is that Lustig earned his fame as the man who sold the Eiffel Tower, not once but twice. Very little is known about Lustig's childhood, and even less can be verified. His real name? Uncertain. His birthplace? Disputed. His past? A collection of half-truths and deliberate lies. Strictly speaking, we don't even know his real name. His death certificate lists him as Robert Miller. Yet news of his death wasn't reported until 2 years later in the New York Times, citing his alleged brother, Emil Lustig. So, was Lustig even real? Or was it just another alias in a long list? We'll never know for sure. His youth is equally murky. For years, it was believed Lustig was born in 1890 in the Austro-Hungarian town of Arnau, possibly to a family of minor nobility. But in 2015, Czech historian Tomáš Plejhach scoured local archives and found no evidence to support this claim. Some accounts say Lustig studied at Charles University in Prague and, after a duel, was sent by his father to the Sorbonne in Paris, the most prestigious university in France. A scar on Lustig's face, supposedly from that duel, became his most recognizable feature when authorities later hunted him. But even that story might be fiction. Others claim the scar came from a bar fight in Paris. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. Viktor Lustig was exceptionally well educated. He spoke 5 languages fluently: English, French, German, Italian, and Czech, and possessed impeccable social graces. You don't learn that kind of polish on the streets. Lustig's criminal career began in Paris, but his true calling emerged during the golden age of transatlantic ocean liners. At the dawn of the 20th century, the French capital was a playground for the ambitious and the corrupt. It's no surprise then that Lustig first became a professional poker player, and soon after, a master of the sleight of hand. But despite the steady earnings, the life of a card sharp bored him. Winning at poker was predictable. Tricking people into giving him their money voluntarily was far more exciting. So Lustig booked a cruise to America. He loved the luxurious transatlantic voyages so much that he spent several years practically living on ships, initially making a living from poker. But then he found a better way. Before one voyage, Lustig ordered a batch of fake lottery tickets and boldly approached the ship's captain, requesting permission to hold a promotional lottery on board. His scam was simple. Passengers bought a ticket, expecting to win a cash prize. If the prize was small, Lustig paid out on the spot, boosting trust. But for larger sums, he congratulated the winner with a smile and instructed them to claim the jackpot at a specific bank after reaching port. By the time they realized the truth, Lustig was long gone. When World War I broke out in Europe, Viktor Lustig decided to steer clear of the fighting and settled in America for several years, landing straight into a paradise for con artists. The United States was experiencing an unprecedented economic boom, with people gripped by the idea that money could be made almost out of thin air. This euphoria, of course, would eventually lead to the Great Depression, but that was still far off. For now, America was awash in cash, During this time, a new class of gentlemanly swindlers emerged, men who earned their fortunes not through theft or robbery, but through subtle schemes and impeccable manners. Lustig fit perfectly into the wild, freewheeling life of New York. He devised a simple yet elegant scam that he'd rely on for years: the so-called money printing machine. It's unclear whether he invented it himself or bought it from another con man, but here's how it worked. He'd load a $100 bill into the device, which he claimed not only copied it, but also printed new serial numbers, a marvel of engineering. The catch? It took 6 hours to produce a copy. Well, what did you expect? Lustig would say. It's slow, yes, but no expert can tell the difference between the fake and the real. Want to test it? Go to a bank and let the teller examine the copy. You might wonder, how could anyone believe such nonsense? But believe it they did. Over his career, Lustig sold around 20 of these machines, raking in $10,000 to $30,000 each. Of course, the money printing machine was a simple trick for suckers. Inside, a mechanism ticked away for 6 hours before spitting out a real $100 bill that had been hidden there all along. The 6-hour delay served two purposes. First, it prevented victims from asking Lustig to print a large batch of bills on the spot. Second, it gave them enough time to disappear before they realized they'd been duped. The real challenge of this scam wasn't the machine, it was earning trust. And that's where Lustig's true mastery shone. He understood people deeply, knowing exactly how to inspire confidence and quell doubts. First, he had a trustworthy, distinguished appearance. Sharp suits, impeccable manners, and vast erudition. He masterfully crafted the image of an honorable man, a solid businessman, and a shrewd entrepreneur rolled into one. Lustig quickly learned which persona people trusted most and rarely strayed from it, adding details as needed to amplify the effect. For instance, early on, he posed as an Austrian count who'd lost his estate during World War I, earning the sympathy of American aristocrats. When selling the money machine to science-obsessed businessmen, he claimed to be a student of Nikola Tesla, saying his invention was based on cutting-edge experiments with radiation, the trendy science of the time. No matter how absurd the premise of his crimes, Viktor Lustig had an uncanny ability to make people believe him. But such a carefree life couldn't last forever. Too many victims knew his face, and the risks were mounting. So in 1925, he decided to leave the US and return to France to pull off his most famous scam, selling the Eiffel Tower. By the way, the idea for the Eiffel Tower scam came to Lustig almost by accident. Today, the Eiffel Tower is the world's most visited landmark and Paris's enduring symbol. But back then, things were different. Many Parisians considered it an eyesore marring the city, and among intellectuals, serious debates raged over whether to keep it or tear it down. Lustig decided to exploit those public sentiments with breathtaking audacity. And frankly, if it weren't for his sheer boldness, the scam might never have worked. Here's how it unfolded. First, he found someone to forge a set of official government documents and an ID card naming him Deputy Director of the Department of Construction. Using this persona, he sent formal letters to 5 prominent Parisian industrialists. "We highly value your contributions to the country," the letters read, "and invite you to a confidential government meeting, no word to the press." His calculation was spot on. Every single one showed up on the appointed day. To lend an extra layer of credibility, Lustig hosted the meeting at a prestigious hotel, dazzling them with luxury and putting them at ease. The fact that the businessmen already knew each other helped too. A familiar setting calms nerves and lulls suspicion. With unwavering confidence, Lustig announced that the government had decided to dismantle the Eiffel Tower and sell it for scrap metal. He claimed he was authorized to find a contractor for this critical task, but stressed the information was top secret. No journalists allowed. Who wants 7,000 tons of metal? All were intrigued, but Lustig needed just one. The man most fired up by the idea, ready to cast aside any doubts. That man was André Poisson. The next day, Lustig contacted Poisson privately, arranged a discreet meeting, and assured him he had the best shot at winning the tender, and forever cementing his name in history as the man who bought the Eiffel Tower. But there was a catch, Lustig hinted. "You know, a government official's life is tough, low pay and all. Maybe we could come to some arrangement?" Poisson quickly caught on that Lustig was hinting at a bribe. If he'd had any lingering doubts, they melted away then and there. From the outside, it might seem Lustig showed astonishing cynicism and gall, tricking Poisson twice in one scam. But Lustig knew better. Hinting at a bribe actually deepened Poisson's trust. After all, it's far easier to believe in a corrupt official than an honest workhorse. So Lustig pocketed both a bribe from the industrialist and an initial payment for the tower, handed Poisson a fake ownership certificate, congratulated him, and slipped away to Austria. How much Lustig made is hard to pin down. Sources vary, citing figures from 70,000 to 500,000 francs. Every day he waited for news of the scam of the century to hit the papers. But time passed and no stories emerged. Lustig was stunned. His calculation had been even sharper than he'd thought. When André Poisson discovered the deception, he chose not to tarnish his reputation by reporting it to the police. That confidence boost was so intoxicating that months later, Lustig returned to Paris and tried to pull off the scam again. People often call Lustig the man who sold the Eiffel Tower twice, but that's not quite true. The second attempt failed. The businessman Lustig targeted grew suspicious and, just to be safe, contacted the police. A manhunt was launched and Lustig barely escaped with his life. Interestingly, André Poisson's name went down in history, despite his efforts to hide his shame, while the name of the businessman who reported Lustig to the police remains unknown. After the failed second attempt to sell the Eiffel Tower, Lustig fled to the United States, where for a while he continued earning a living by selling his fake money-printing machines. But the Great Depression was looming, a crisis that would force most con artists to abandon their elaborate schemes for the gray routine of organized crime. Lustig would experience this shift himself, but for now things seemed to be going well for him. He even managed to dupe the chief of the Texas police, not once, but twice. First, he sold him that very same money-printing machine. When the sheriff realized he'd been conned, he threw all his resources into tracking down the swindler. And, astonishingly, he found him. At that moment, Lustig stood on the razor's edge between death and prison, but he miraculously talked his way out. He convinced the policeman that he'd simply misused the machine and, as an apology, returned the full amount. Humiliating, sure, but better than a sell. There's a theory that Lustig paid off the sheriff with counterfeit money, leading to his eventual arrest, but I couldn't find any solid evidence for that story. Then there was another amusing episode. Lustig managed to sell a worthless plot of desert land for an astronomical sum. More precisely, he bought it himself first, then a businessman named Jonathan Pickering showed up, offering a fortune for it. Why? Pickering had read an article claiming a massive gold deposit had been discovered on that land. He thought he was making a brilliant investment, buying a literal gold mine from an unsuspecting owner. But he didn't know Lustig had paid a journalist to publish that fake story. Pickering didn't realize he'd been duped immediately and later sued the newspaper, which simply issued an apology. And that was the end of that. Now the plausibility of another story raises serious doubts. Nearly every website repeats the same tale of how Lustig brazenly swindled the kingpin of the criminal underworld, Al Capone, in a scheme that was both brilliantly calculated and utterly absurd. Supposedly, Lustig approached the mob boss and claimed he had a foolproof deal that would double Capone's investment. He asked for $50,000, promising to return double that in 2 months if all went well. Intrigued, the gangster handed over the cash, and Lustig simply stashed it in a safe deposit box for 2 months, twiddling his thumbs. Then, posing as a pauper, he returned to Capone, claiming the deal had fallen through and he'd lost everything. But here, take back your $50,000. I had to sell all my possessions to do it. Astonished by Lustig's honesty, Capone reportedly gave him an extra $5,000 out of pity, which, the story goes, was Lustig's goal all along. Honestly, I can't fathom who would believe such a tale. Probably the same people who fell for Lustig's money-printing machines. There's no hard evidence for this story, just Lustig's own prison yarn. And can you imagine what a professional con man might say about himself? Al Capone wasn't some romanticized bandit from the movies. He killed over far lesser offenses. It's far more likely Lustig would have ended up with cement shoes for his honesty than a $5,000 reward. By the 1930s, Lustig's instincts began to falter, and his schemes started resembling common thuggery. During one attempt to swindle businessman Thomas Kearns in style, Lustig inexplicably stole $18,000 from his home. Sure, I understand why he stole it, to get the money, but this was completely out of character for him. Then Lustig threw caution to the wind and launched a business that would ultimately land him in prison. Why bother selling fake money printing machines, he thought, when I can print counterfeit money directly? In 1930, Lustig met chemists William Watts and Tom Shaw, and together they launched the most massive counterfeiting operation in 20th century America. Millions of fake bills flooded the market, and Lustig increasingly caught the police's attention. But for a while, he managed to slip away. He even started using disguises for the first time, traveling everywhere with a suitcase full of costumes for quick changes. It helped that the police only had a verbal description of the criminal. Lustig was remarkably adept at avoiding photographers. That's why all the photos you see in this video were taken after his arrest, when the scale of his counterfeiting became alarming. The Secret Service stepped in, a U.S. law enforcement unit tasked with just two things: combating counterfeiters and protecting the president. Never in his career had Lustig faced such a serious manhunt. Swindling fools was one thing, but threatening the nation's economic stability was another. They brought in their top agent, Peter Rubano, who had already nabbed several notorious gangsters by then. How much longer this cat-and-mouse game would have lasted, we'll never know, until a romantic twist intervened. Lustig's lover, Billy May, betrayed him to the police. She suspected he had another woman and saw no better way to get revenge. In 1935, Peter Rubano arrested Lustig in New York, along with that very suitcase of costumes. But surprisingly, no other evidence was found on him at the time. Lustig confidently answered every police question, insisting it was all a mistake and he was an honest man. He might have been released again if Rubano hadn't noticed an unassuming key to a safe deposit box in Lustig's wallet. When pressed, Lustig couldn't explain its purpose, and the search led agents to a subway station, where they found $50,000 in counterfeit bills and the plates used to print them. The authorities could finally rejoice. The master American counterfeiter was behind bars, but their joy was short-lived. Days later, they discovered Lustig's Manhattan jail cell empty. He had escaped from the third floor using a rope made of knotted bed sheets. Right in the heart of the city, in plain sight of hundreds of passers-by, who noticed nothing amiss. Lustig descended slowly, as if nothing was wrong, even pausing to wipe the windows as he went. People assumed he was just a window washer and paid him no mind. It was, you could say, Lustig's grand finale, a final swindle by the legendary con man. But his freedom didn't last. He was recaptured a month later and swiftly put on trial. Ironically, the only charge against him was counterfeiting. He wasn't punished for swindling businessmen, his money printing machine, or the countless other schemes he'd pulled off. In short, if Lustig hadn't dabbled in counterfeit money, he might have lived out his days in peace. Instead, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison and sent to Alcatraz, the harshest prison of its time. There, he served 12 years before dying of pneumonia in 1947, and that was the man Viktor Lustig was. Viktor Lustig is a cult figure of adventure and audacity. Even if every story about his life were proven false, except for selling the Eiffel Tower, he'd still secure his place in history. Though I find it somewhat unhealthy to glorify con artists, it feels like a reflection of our secret desires, to live extravagantly without working, all at someone else's expense. Hit that red subscribe button. It's the gray one now.